take us back into time, May 1999. Where were you when you got that call to join Operation Safed Sagar?
27 years back, when actually the conflict started, I was an instructor in the test pilot school.
Tell us what was going on in the Kargil theatre of war. Was there a certain sense of pressure on you to deliver the lightning pods?
So we knew that we are up against, not against insurgents, it's going to be the actual regular army, and they are well equipped. So yes, the pressure was there. But if you recall, since we had lost 2 aircraft, we were also a little cautious and careful. One, of course, the high altitude at which all these targets were. Second, a diktat was given that you will not cross the line of control. Right. So that limited options on directions of approach and how you will attack. And third, we knew that since they were already sitting on those heights with Stinger and Anza missiles, we had to maintain a safe bubble after we lost these 2 aircraft.
Pakistan Army went into this operation planning that the Indian Air Force would never enter the theatre of conflict because they could not undertake these kind of high altitude bombings. Did it come as a major surprise to the Pakistanis when we launched the Indian Air Force into action and the breakthroughs with your lightning pods and the high altitude air bombing?
So things change in operations. You have to be flexible, you have to keep evolving. This is all true even in the latest conflicts. If you see how the Ukraine-Russia war has progressed, so you evolve based on the challenges that comes in front of you and you innovate. And that is what we did.
Tell us about the Josh in the Indian Air Force at that time. What was the feeling like on the squadron, on the ground, as you went in testing these new capabilities with your men?
See, that's the good thing about uniform and our training is we know that you're training for that one day when you're really required, and people don't worry about working hours and things like that. And it is not only me and my small team, but everybody else was so joshed up with adrenaline that you were practically working 24 hours. You never worried about did you get enough sleep.
Hello and welcome to the Sandeep Unnithan Show, your weekly dose of defense, geopolitics and much more. Today I have with me on my show Air Marshal N Tiwari, former Vice Chief of Air Staff. Air Marshal Tiwari is a combat veteran. He's seen action during Operation Safed Sagar during the Kargil War of 1999. Air Marshal Tiwari, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Air Marshal Tiwari, I must tell you that we are speaking here today 27 years after the Kargil War, after Operation Vijay. There's a new web series out which has once again restarted the debate about the role of the Indian Air Force in one of India's finest victories in the last few decades. The use of offensive air power, of course, which was a turning point. You're a veteran of Operation Safed Sagar and, of course, Operation Sindoor. Just last year, you retired as Vice Chief of Air Staff. But take us back into time, May 1999. Where were you when you got that call to join Operation Safed Sagar?
So, Sandeep, I think, to go back 27 years, I watched this series also on Netflix, and it brought back a lot of the old memories. Of course, 27 years back, when actually the conflict started, I was an instructor in the test pilot school. We have a Air Force test pilot school in Bangalore under the
ASTE. Yes.
Yeah. So I was an instructor there, but this lightning pod, of which we'll talk later, I've been associated right from the beginning of the integration, which started somewhere in 96. And on that day, I remember, I think it was 27th of May, if I'm not wrong, when my CEO of the school, we were actually still undergoing training of test pilots. So we were running a curriculum. And since I was a senior instructor there, so we were going about our business as usual. When, Safed Sagar was officially announced. But on 27th, I remember my CEO called me. He is later Air Marshal RK Sharma, sorry. He was that time a group captain, CEO of the test pilot school. So he called me around 6 o'clock in the evening as we were about to, pack up for the day. And he said, my nickname is TV. So he said, TV, I think you will need to go to Gwalior immediately. So I knew that something was on, and of course, people have been mobilized. So I was assuming I will go back and probably get augmented to my old squadron, which was 7th Squadron, the battle axis. But he said, no, we are going there because we are planning that you may need to integrate or utilize this lightning pod at some point of time during the operation. So that was a little bit of a news to me.
Right.
And so I said, fine. So I went back home quickly, packed a small suitcase. So my wife asked me, how long you'll be gone. I said, probably a week, I should be back. And they had arranged a special aircraft. And of course, there were 2, 3 other people from AST who were getting augmented to normal squadrons. I remember Colonel Mishra, G2 Mishra, who recently retired as the CNCW Western Air Command, as well as, Air Marshal Dixit, who's currently the Vice Chief. So all 3 of us, so we sat on a Dornier aircraft and wound up all the way through Hakimpet to Gwalior. And I reached Gwalior at about 2 o'clock in the night on early morning of 28th. And so I know Gwalior at that time was a buzz of activity.
Right.
And the squadrons had already deployed because, since the Safed Sagar had been announced, both 1 and 7 squadron at that point of time were already deployed to their forward locations. But there was still a lot of activity going on, a lot of transport movements. So I knew things are quite serious. And I went back to my old room because I was a bachelor there when before I moved for my instructor's course as well as the test pilot's course subsequently. So I went back to my old room because the squadron had moved out and I had barely hit the bed when the phone rang. And it was a normal landline. Those days, mobiles were not very freely available. It was an exchange which was online and saying the base commander, the AOC that time, Air Commodore Aluwalia, who
Yes.
later on became the PMP. So
Western Air
he was
Command.
on Western Air Command, and he wanted to speak to me. So I picked up the phone, and of course, he was on the line from the other side and said that he wants to meet me at 4 o'clock. So this was already 3 o'clock. So I said, there's no point trying to, take a nap now. So I just freshened up, put on my overalls, and I was in his office at 4 in the morning. And this was, I think, early 28th. So as it is, a lot of activity was happening. So basically, he started asking me about, what is the lightning pod about and what is the state of affair,
Right.
things like that.
For the benefit of our viewers, Air Marshal Tiwari, explain to us what a lightning pod is. What does it really do for a fighter aircraft?
So let me go back a little bit before I talk about the lightning pod. Is that, on the Mirage 2000 specifically, we already had a laser designation pod.
Right.
Now, a laser designation pod is basically a pod which you can, first of all, has a powerful camera on board through which you can see small targets. And secondly, it has a laser on board, which you can, thereafter ensure and integrate a bomb which rides on that laser and hits the target.
Right.
So this is essentially what a laser pod does. So it picks up target. So very accurately, you can see a small target because of the zoom facility available on the camera. You can see it on the display in the cockpit. And the laser is firing at that, the aim point. And if you release a bomb within a certain envelope, it rides that laser and hits the target very accurately. So in a nutshell, this is what a laser bomb does, or laser guided bomb and a pod does. Okay. Now, at that point of time on the Mirage 2000, we already had the French pod, but it had its own limitation. The major limitation was, of course, it was a day pod. You couldn't use it at night. And the second was it could only be used with a French bomb, which was the Matra bomb, which was a 1,000 kg bomb. So it was a very large caliber weapon, but also very expensive. So at the time frame of 95, 96, the Air Force was already looking at 2 things. One is to get cheaper bombs, which you could use more often. And we had homed on to 2, which is the Paveway 2, which was at that time being made by Texas Instruments. It's an American company. And the Griffin, which was made by Israeli company. Now, these 2 were essentially kits So they were laser guided kits which you could put on a normal 1,000-pound bomb, and they became a laser guided bomb. So we had enough 1,000-pound bombs in our inventory. So if you had bought the kits, you could convert a lot of weapons and into a laser guided bomb, and of course it is much cheaper. Now the complexity was that the time of flight of these weapons compared to the Matra bomb was different. And therefore, since the French pod could only be integrated with the Matra bomb, that was a challenge to integrate the Paveway and the Griffin using the French pod. So at that same time, we were looking at upgrading that pod so that we could utilize these two weapons. And that's how already a contract was out for replacement of the Atlas pod on the Mirage. And we had homed on to there were three customers, essentially vendors. One was the French itself. They had an upgraded pod which could be used, which had a night capability. That time, of course, we were also looking at adding a night capability. So that involves having a forward-looking infrared on board, apart from the day camera.
Right.
The other was other was a British company, which had the TIL pod, and the third was the Lightning pod, which was from Israel. Now, the quirky thing was we wanted to integrate this pod on both the Jaguar and the Mirage. Because essentially, we have more capability on two different platforms at that point of time. That was the whole idea. And we could use both these weapons. Now, the point came about, the French were very confident that they could integrate on the Mirage. The British were very confident they could do it in Jaguar. But it was only the Israelis who were confident that they could do it on both, despite having no previous experience of doing it on either. But they were quite confident that they were able to meet the requirement, and also integrated in such a way that this pod could be interchangeably used between the two aircraft. It is not specific to aircraft.
Right.
So that is a software modification that was required. So around 96, we had already shortlisted the Lightning pod to be integrated on the Mirage 2000, the Jaguar. And I was designated as the lead pilot. Of course, this program happened over a period of 3 to 4 years on the Mirage and a little longer on the Jaguar. And there were many other people involved. It is not just me. I remember there was Squadron Leader Arora, at least on the Mirage 2000, Squadron Leader Jeetu Mishra, who retired as CNCWAC. And we had very capable flight test engineers, Flight Lieutenant Dash. We had Squadron Leader Mantha, who was also involved with me subsequently when we did the integration in Gwalior, just before I pushed off to Adhampur for the actual operations. And of course, there were the whole team of men, very, very capable men who could do this. So it was a fairly big team and it carried on for a fair amount of time. But to give you a context, in March, and I have got my logbook, 16th of March, I still remember, 99, I ferried out to Jaisalmer with Squadron Mishra and the other members of the team to do the final trial on the Mirage 2000. And between 16th and 25th of March 1999, we had more or less done the final integration on the Mirage 2000 using both the Paveway bomb.
Right.
Now, there were two or three issues. The small issues still remained at that point of time, which were bugs, and we had said that we will sort this out in the next phase of trials. But essentially, 95% of the integration in March was over on the Mirage 2000. The Jaguar was still a work in progress because remember that Jaguar had not had a laser designation pod before this.
Right.
It had a old system, which was a cockpit laser designation system, but it was carried in the rear cockpit of a trainer. But a typical laser designation pod, they had not integrated earlier. So obviously that was going to take a little longer. But since on the Mirage, we had done this earlier, it was a little smoother integration. Not smoother, but we were able to do it faster.
Right.
And so at the point of March 1999, I would say about 95% of the integration was done. But the problem was we had 6 pods. And since we were doing trials on both the aircraft, some pods were in different versions of software because it's still iterative and a lot of work was still happening. So only 2 pods were in the final configuration of software in which I had flown in March when actual Kargil conflict broke out.
Right. So 2 months before the conflict, you already had, like you said, 95% of the Lightning pod had been integrated into the Mirage fleet. And it was just the high altitude part, which I think was the tough nut to crack here.
No, there were two or three other things. Of course, there were some bugs which were still not sorted out, which we had found out during the testing. But the other critical thing was that we tested the Griffin and the Payway, like I said,
Right.
using the lightning pod. But we had, a normal 1,000-pounder bomb has explosive. It also has a fuse.
Right.
Now, fuse was worrisome for us because the fuse we tested during the trials in these last 2 years.
In Pokhran.
In Pokhran and before that,
Right.
because we had done a separate set of trials just for the bomb. And this was the trial done for the integration of the bomb with the pod, the
Right.
last phase in March. So while we were just, testing, doing the tests on the bomb itself, both the Griffin and the Paveway, we had an issue with the fuse. We
Right.
had fuse that we were using, which actually triggers the explosion when a
Yeah.
bomb impacts the ground. Now they were in very limited number.
Right.
And the Air Force at that point of time was already looking at another, fuse, which will be available in larger numbers. But unfortunately, when the war broke out, the state was that the fuse that we had used were available in very, very limited, practically in single digits. So when the war broke out, while the pod was 95% ready, we really didn't have a bomb to use it with, because we knew that if the war extended, you would not have fuses available. So it was very, very critical that this aspect also was known to the authorities, because we had to actively look for a new fuse. So what I did in Gwalior when I landed up there is, of course, we collected all the pods from various places. Two were in Gwalior, because that was the last phase of trials that we had done at ferried it. But most were in Bangalore. So it all came down to, we got it all to Gwalior. And since we had to upgrade all the software to the last version that I had flown, I had made a request to Air Marshal Ahluwalia, that time AOC, that I need to call the program manager in Israel, because his two or three core people of who were the software and who were basically involved with the software and all, they need to come here to operate the testers and a test bench and put the pod on and upgrade the software to the latest version that we had, so that we had one standard version of software on the 6 pods.
Right.
So we said, go ahead and call. So, this was practically around 5 in the morning. I had finished all these explanations. I said, it must be 2:30 at night in Israel. So I'll wait a little while. And finally, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I did call them. And to the credit of the Israelis, they didn't ask any question who will pay and things like that, for this, because it was a part of a contract. But they said, we will send our best people on the next flight that is available. And sure enough, 2 days later, they were in Gwalior. They came through Bombay. And I got to work with them, start working with them, with my team, and sorting out the pod itself. And finally, I flew all the pods practically to see that all are working correctly in the same software.
Right.
And on most of the sorties at that point of time, Air Commodore Ahluwalia used to fly with me, because he was keen to also see the capability of the pod. So that was the other challenge, because operationally this pod had not been seen by anyone at all, including the squadron. The squadron saw it much later, and the squadron was already out. So at that point of time, very few people knew about what was happening in Gwalior. And of course, the core team, on which me, Squadron Mishra, and Flight Squadron Mantha, we were the three officers. The AOC that time, of course, Air Commodore Ahluwalia, and the crew, who was Group Captain Vartaman, who was earlier the chief test pilot of Abhinandan's father.
Right.
He was the chief test pilot of AST, and from there he had moved to Gwalior. So this set of 4 or 5 people were the only people who knew what we were doing in Gwalior. Essentially, idea was to keep a little bit of secrecy and basically operational confidentiality on the whole program. So practically those people, the battle axes who later on got to use this pod, they were all already deployed, and no one knew exactly what was happening in Gwalior.
So while you were doing all of this testing, trials, tell us what was going on in the Kargil theater of war. had the army launched its assaults on the peaks, was there a certain sense of pressure on you to deliver the lightning pods? Because the army was under a lot of pressure at that time. This was before the key turning points in the Kargil war.
So definitely what happened, if you recall on 21st, of course, initially the state of infiltration and the extent was not really known neither to the army nor to the Air Force.
Right.
And things became much, the seriousness of it became clearer much later. This is all well documented. But if you recall on 21st, Air Force was asked to deploy much earlier. And but because being an escalatory nature of, using air power, I think, the Air Force rightly said that we need the clearance from the government rather than it be a Army Air Force cooperation at that point of time. Because we were not even sure the extent of the infiltration, what kind of weapons these so-called insurgents had at that point. And therefore, before, committing helicopters, which was initially asked by the Army, I think we decided let's do some recce missions and actually see what is there on the ground. And if you recall, on 21st of May, we had sent a Canberra
Yeah.
and do a photo recce mission. And that a Stinger missile or ANZA, we don't know what it was. One of the missiles was fired, and finally it got damaged. And the aircraft recovered and landed, fortunately, in Srinagar. So we knew that we are up against, not against insurgents, it's going to be the actual regular army, and they are
Right.
well equipped.
Right.
So sending the Air Force, we had to take a call of, the tactical considerations as well as the strategic, outlook of that. And therefore, it went through the Chief of Staff's committee, and there finally CCS took a call on 26th and said that we must employ the Air Force. And that is how the Air Force entered. So yes, the pressure was there. But if you recall, since we had lost 2 aircraft, we were also a little cautious and careful, because there were 2 or 3 challenges. One, of course, the high altitude at which all these targets were. Second, a diktat was given that you will not cross the line of control. So
Right.
that limited options on directions of approach and, how you will attack. And third, we knew that since they were already sitting on those heights with Stinger and ANZA missiles, we had to maintain a safe bubble after we lost these 2 aircraft.
Right.
And subsequently, we lost a helicopter also on the third day.
Yes.
So obviously, we had to review the tactics, and we had to do high altitude delivery. So that added to the challenge and complexity, because one is itself the targets were so high, and then you're doing a higher altitude delivery. So it is challenging for the aircraft because you are operating close to the maneuvering envelope of your aircraft itself, and so is true for the weapons, because the higher you go, the weapon accuracy, everything will suffer.
Right.
So we had these multiple challenges, and of course, the fact that the targets were very slow. Another big challenge also was the changing weather and the snow. If you recall, in May, it was still covered in snow in very large
It just started
parts of the
melting.
country.
Yes.
Yeah, it had started melting. But the tricky thing was that, you go to the same target area on a second day, some of the snow has melted, so the target area is to look very different itself visually. Now to spot, small targets like bunkers and sangars and small posts was very, very difficult. So those challenges were there. But that is why I thought that Lightning Pod was a good option, because it had a day camera and a night camera. So even night you could see things absolutely clearly. And since it had a fairly good zoom, even from height, you can pick up very, very small targets.
Yeah, I was looking at the Pakistani planning of this operation, Kargil, that they called Kohe Paima, and the accounts that have been written about Koh Paima or Operation KP by Pakistani authors like Nasim Zehra seem to indicate that the Pakistan army went into this operation planning that the Indian Air Force would never enter the theater of conflict because they could not undertake these kind of high altitude bombings. These posts were over 12,000 feet. And as you mentioned, they had equipped themselves with Stinger missiles. They had brought down our aircraft with Stinger missiles. They had Anza missiles as well, Pakistani versions of that. And they tried to deter us from launching airstrikes on their targets. Did it come as a major surprise to the Pakistanis when we launched the Indian Air Force into action and the breakthroughs with your lightning pods and the high altitude air bombing?
Yeah, so I presume that it is well said that nothing goes as per plan when you after the first contact. So things change in operations. You have to be flexible. You have to keep evolving. And this is all true even in the latest conflicts. If you see how the Ukraine-Russia war has progressed, I'm
Right.
saying you evolve based on the challenges that comes in front of you, and you innovate. And that is what we did. Of course, we were fortunate that we had the lightning pod in the state that we had at that point of time. So that was obviously a big asset. And I'm not sure at that point of time did the Pakistanis know that we had this pod and this capability. Of course, even after having this capability, the fact remained that many of our weapons we were dropping were very close to the edge of the envelope, or some even outside the edge.
Right.
So, in fact, we didn't have, normally you have load tables, what we call forward throw tables for these kind of weapons. Most used to finish at 20,000 feet. Now, and there were many times we had to launch at even 25,000, 26,000 feet because the targets were itself at 15, 16,000 to keep yourself safe.
And you were bombing above the targets, well above.
So if you keep 10,000 feet as a safe bubble, you're talking of 25,000 feet to drop the weapon.
Right.
And you don't have load tables and the forward throw tables available for those. So a lot of this we had to innovate and on the fly during the operations. But I think the Air Force was up to speed on those matters.
Right. And how many days did it really take you when you were at Gwalior, when you were improvising the lightning pods, integrating it into the Mirage aircraft, and you're doing it in such utter secrecy?
Yeah. So let me just tell you, if I give you the timeline, when I reached on 28, in fact I went through my logbook because after Safed Sagar I said let me refresh the dates, and I flew a 29th on 29th of May. I flew one quick sortie there just to get familiar with the cockpit again, because as test pilots we fly many different types of aircraft. Though my original aircraft is a Mirage 2000. But like I said, that time I was doing the instructor's role in the test pilot school. So I was flying the MiGs and the, Kirans and the Avro and the AN-32s. So just I did one handling sortie to get back into the Mirage cockpit. And by then the Israelis had arrived. And when they came, I started flying the Lightning. We had these two pods, which I said, which were already configured in the last software. So I flew two sorties on them with the AOC just to show him what is the capability and things like that of the pod, because that was important for the authority to know how this pod could be utilized during the operations. So I flew with the AOC. Subsequently, I flew with the CNC of Central Air Command. That time was Air Marshal Jimmy Bhatia. He came and I flew with him. And I also did a night sortie with the AOC. So this all happened between 29th and 30th of May. And by then, of course, our team was working on the ground. And like I said, at that point, we had a bigger challenge of the weapon, of the bomb. We had to look for a new fuse. So my core team of 2 or 3 airmen went scouting around all the air bases to try and figure out if we have a fuse which could fit on this bomb, on the payaway kit and the 1,000-pounder, which we should have had in adequate numbers so that it may be used in the operations. And to our luck, on the second day, we finally found this fuse in the bomb dump of Kanpur. And I got a message at night. So I told them immediately come back. And we had, of course, they had taken the drawings of the fuse and, the cavity, etc. And when they came back and we started working at night itself to try and see if we could integrate this fuse. And in the next 2 days, our entire team worked day in and day out to make it work. I had to do some modifications on the pylon for the fuse to work, and then subsequently a quick set of trials to see the carriage handling and actual dropping. So all this happened. Parallelly, the pods were getting upgraded to the new software. So I had to fly the pods to ensure that the pods are behaving and all working on the same software. So all this happened between 30th and 3rd. So this was just practically 4 days. And I see in my logbook that on 4th morning, me and AOC, Commodore Aluwalia, he flew with me in the backseater, and Scholar Mishra, he was the chase, Jitu Mishra. We flew from what do you call, Gwalior, went to Jodhpur, loaded the bomb, dropped it in Pokhran, and flew back to Gwalior, all in a matter of 4 hours. And we proved the bomb with the new fuse, and it was working fine. So I came back on 4th by 10:30 on the 11 in the morning. I was back in Gwalior, having left at 6. We made a small, I had to make a small document because I knew that since this is a new pod and the new weapon, to tell operational pilots what needs to be done, you need to have a document. Otherwise, chances of mistakes are, quite common. So I sat and made that document. And 5th morning, I went to Adampur, where the squadron was already deployed, and started this process of now familiarizing people with the pod as well as the weapon. And we utilize, so this pressure was there because having lost those aircraft, we had
Yes.
resorted to high-level GPS bombing. The accuracy and, the effect of that was, we were not getting good feedback in terms of, whether it was really very effective or not. Because first of all, you have to realize that if you're bombing on top of peaks,
Yes.
even if weapons fall 100 to 200 meters away, they go into a valley and it has no effect.
Right.
Okay. Secondly, getting intelligence, whether the targets were destroyed or not, was itself very difficult because many of these peaks were, in your adversary's hand, and we could not really fly low-level photo recce missions to understand whether the targets, the bombs have been effective or not. So those challenges were there. And this pod, to some extent, sorted out those issues, because that is how one of the main things, if you ask me, the main attack or the main principal operation during this Kargil conflict was the attack on Munthodalo.
Yeah. The logistics dump of the Pakistan.
Logistic camp it was actually in our territory, but very
Right.
carefully camouflaged across the cliff. So
Right.
if you're actually going from our side, it was very difficult to spot it unless you're practically there was a cliff overhang and it was right underneath it.
Yes.
Now, this pod played a pivotal role in ensuring that we could take that target out, because we had been going to that area. That Munthodalo camp was initially small. We had photographs of that from the initial days, hardly 10 or 15 huts in that area, and it was the logistics hub supplying to the Batalik sector. But what happened was, we had given a certain set of coordinates. And after this, when we are doing, GPS bombing, we are using those coordinates and practically, doing non-visual bombing, if I may say. But what really happened was, whether we had really destroyed the camp or not, we didn't have that feedback. So we took this pod and went to that area, which were the designated coordinates of which were given to us through the intelligence, and searched. So I remember we had about 2 or 3 missions. This was in the time frame of, let's say 12th to 14th of June. So we used to come back, we used to play the tape because this pod could record the entire video. And while on the aircraft itself, you have a very small display. So sometimes very difficult to make out, granularity of visuals. But when you play it on a big screen, like a 29-inch screen on the ground, a lot of things are much more clearer. So we used to play the tape on the ground, but this camp was nowhere there at that location where it was supposed to be. So we were very, very surprised, and we studied the map, and then we realized that there was another area 1 kilometer away, which had similar contours, and we decided to take that chance that, okay, let's send a recce mission using the lightning pod there and see if we can pick up the target.
Right.
So this was on 15th. We sent a mission.
15th of May.
15th of June.
Of June, right.
Yeah. This is after the operations have already started.
Right.
So he went to that new area where we had designated. He searched around. On the display, he couldn't see anything. So he came back and he told on the ground that I couldn't spot Munthodalo. So we said, okay, let's play the tape. And we played the tape, and sure enough, it was there. And he didn't see in the cockpit, but it was there when you played it on a big screen and clearly visible. In fact, that 15 huts had grown to almost 100 huts. So it was a very
This was a
large
Mirage. This was a Mirage cockpit. This was a Mirage aircraft that had flown over.
Mirage aircraft.
Right.
Okay. And So we told Western Air Command, our controlling operational command, that look, we have found Munthodalo. The coordinates are a little out. These are the new coordinates, and we have spotted it. So, there was a lot of, I would say, anxiety, as well as, people in command wanted to see something real happening on ground and our air to ground bombing being effective. So, a lot of excitement, and they said, okay, we are sending a special aircraft. You please come to Delhi and brief us. This was right from the CNC, Air Marshal Patni. So, me and Squadron Mohan Rao, who was the flight commander of 7th Squadron, two of us boarded our aircraft in the evening from Adhampur, went to Delhi. I remember we landed probably about 6 in the evening, went straight to the ops room of WAC and played this tape. So there was a lot of buzz and excitement that, yeah, finally we have found. And I said that now we have found, we can take this out very easily. So the CNC was very, very clear in his direction. He says, tomorrow morning, I don't want to see this camp. This is what he said. So we went back the same night. We reached back at Adhampur at about 11 in the morning. But the thing was that since this camp was only picked up more or less by chance on the fly, the pilot in the cockpit himself was not familiar, or he was not sure that he had picked up or not. So in the morning, what we did was we sent 2 trainer aircrafts with 4 people who were going to be in the actual mission to go and visually see the target from height. Because we knew exactly where it was now, and they spotted it, and then they figured out the attack directions and things like that. And by the time we had 4 Mirage 2000s ready with 250 kg bombs each, 8 250 kg bombs on each aircraft. And remember, these were normal 250 kg dumb bombs. It was not a laser guided bomb.
Right.
These 4 aircrafts went, and I was there in the subsequent formation. We took the lightning to even film it to ensure that the target has been destroyed. And very precise attacks, so that the entire camp was flattened, and we had the film to prove it. So it made such a huge difference. We had sent so many missions to that area.
Yes.
And practically you could see some pockmarks on the ground, but nothing visible which really destroyed the target. Whereas just one mission of 4 aircraft followed by a confirmatory launch of the lightning pod to film it, the whole camp was destroyed. And they probably lost between 100 to 300 people there. It was the major loss for them in this Kargil conflict.
And was that Munthodalo explosion, that destruction of their logistics dump, was it the largest loss of Pakistani lives in the Kargil conflict?
Yes. And it really broke their back in the Batalic sector. And things became much easier for the army subsequently. So this pod made a huge difference. Of course, people remember Tiger Hill as a mission,
Right.
but that was a week later. But I think, in my view, the attack on Munthodalo was actually the most important mission of that Kargil conflict.
Right. And what were your feelings like when you saw that Munthodalo dump go up in flames? You were there, you recorded it as it happened. Tell us what went through you in that cockpit when you saw those blasts.
We were very, very exuberant, and we were really thrilled. More than us, the army was very thrilled, because immediately there was a lot of chatter on the radio, and they came to know that, because remember, this was on the other side of the cliff. So the army could not visually see it, because they were on our side. There was a huge cliff, and then there's a small valley kind of a thing, overhang. So visually the army was not, but when the camp actually got destroyed, there was a lot of chatter on RT, and the number of people lost and panic messages going back from the Pakistani sides to their rare bases, and
Right.
they were all intercepted. So the army was absolutely exuberant that we had done this, and I think really increased the josh, and that was our aim also.
Right. So, Marshal Tiwari, you've been getting a lot of messages. I saw your post on Twitter X, especially after this new OTT series, Safed Sagar, where you were asked why the Mirage and the Lightning pods came in so late into the conflict. Why is it that people seem to have missed this timeline that you've narrated to me in such granular detail?
It captures the Air Force life, and I think to large part what 17 Squadron did very accurately.
Right.
But I'm sorry that they really missed out the facts on the Mirage 2000 and lighting integration. They got it completely wrong. So
Mhm.
I don't know, probably a better due diligence should have been done. But the point is, I've told this timeline to you. First of all, the squadron was not involved at all in this integration. This was all happening in Bangalore, and even in Gwalior, it was the AST team which was doing it. And
Right.
that must be acknowledged.
Yes.
Both the lightning pod as well as, the bomb initially. All the trials were done in Gwalior. Part of the reason why probably a lot of people are not aware, like I said, we were doing it a lot of secrecy,
Right.
and the spawn was already deployed, so very few people knew exactly the facts on ground. So that could be one of the reasons why probably they got it wrong. The second aspect also is that while the timeline is what it is, if you see what I've told you, between 29th of May and 5th of June, finally, when I moved to Adhampur, we had finished the entire integration, uh, integrated the new weapon, practically a new paveway guided bomb, a laser
Right.
guided bomb, as well as, all got the pod online, and we are working, 24/7 practically. So it was just a matter of 1 week, and we
Right.
deployed to Adhampur. So the pod was already being used from 7th onwards. In
Right.
fact, if I see my logbook, I started initially briefing them and doing the training for the people in 7th Squadron. And within, we formed a small core group. So while the operations were happening, the training was also happening parallelly. And first time we really effectively used, initially we were using for reconnaissance, and it proved a great, asset during the Munthodalo attack.
Right.
So, so maybe these facts were not known to other people who were deployed at other places. So if you look at this timeline, it was not such a long timeline when the pods finally came in, but maybe a little bit of a cinematic license, I would say. The dialogues were written in such a way that, the bomb and the pod came in very late. But
Right.
practically within about 10 days, it was being used during the operations.
Right. And possibly this is something that the filmmakers could correct in another season of Operation Safed Sagar. We hear that there's a possibility there could be another season of the battle axis being deployed. But that is a cinema for you. That is OTT for you, Marshal Tiwari. But tell us
But
about the spirit of the Indian
I
Air
think,
Force.
sorry, just to interrupt, I thought, there should be a clarification, because I think
Yes.
the acknowledgement which is due in the right places should be put out even in this series. And I'm
Right.
sure if they want to make something with the Mirages, I think it'll be as interesting, if not more. But they should get the facts right. I think that is
Right.
important.
So, is this the fastest that the Indian Air Force has deployed a platform, a system in combat? You're talking of a timeline of what, literally a week plus, 10 days, 12 days, when you went literally from the word go to the bombing of Munthodalo. Tell us about the Josh in the Indian Air Force at that time. What was the feeling like on the squadron, on the ground, as you went in testing these new capabilities with your men?
See, that's the good thing about uniform and our training is, we know that you're training for that one day when you're really required, and people don't worry about, working hours and things like that. And it is not only me and my small team, but everybody else was, so joshed up with adrenaline that you were practically working 24 hours. You never worried about did you get enough sleep, or whether you are. I flew three sorties a day, despite flying, despite being, sleeping 2 or 3 hours at times. Even on, I remember the Tiger Hill attack, when we have, Air Chief Marshal Tipnis had come the previous evening, and I flew a sortie with him in the night because he wanted to see uh, how the lightning capability was at night.
Right.
We finished, we came back, we had dinner because he was on the base in Adhampur, and we wound up at 11 o'clock at night. And we were up at 4 in the morning because I had a briefing for the Tiger Hill. Okay, so there's two aircraft mission, and he flew with us on the third aircraft. So I was flying in one aircraft with Squadron Rao, who was the flight commander. Wing Commander Nambiar and Squadron Monish Yadav was in the other aircraft. We were the two aircraft main formation. And the Air Chief Marshal Tipnis with the CO that time, Wing Commander Chhabra, he insisted. So he flew on the third aircraft, trailing us to see visually what was happening with the attack. So we got up at 4 in the morning. So practically we slept 3 to 4 hours. So that used to be the Josh that no task was too difficult for us, and that is true for everybody else also.
Right. No task is difficult for us, and indeed, that's a fact when it comes to the Air Force. So I have an anecdote of my own, Marshal Tiwari, of Safed Sagar. I didn't cover the war, but I was in Mumbai in those days. I was a reporter with the Indian Express in Mumbai. I remember Air Chief Marshal Tipnis had visited us a few days after Operation Safed Sagar, and he was very exuberant when we asked him about the Indian Air Force's role in Safed Sagar. And he mentioned another conflict where the Air Force had been kept out of it. At least the fighter squadrons were not deployed. That is the 1962 war with China. And he mentioned the fact that he was sitting in a hunter aircraft, a fighter aircraft, strapped in, ready to go and take on the Chinese, but that order never came. And here, 37 years later, the Indian Air Force had finally vindicated itself, because you saw the use of offensive air power for the first time after 1971. So that was a high point for the Indian Air Force. And of course, you built up on that. After Kargil in 99, you had the Balakot bombing in 2019, and of course, Operation Sindoor in 2025.
I would think so, because, before Op Sindoor, you had Balakot.
Yes.
So the fact that air power can be utilized even in limited conflict, I think that is now fairly well established, and the political leadership is aware of it. And the efficacy of long-range strikes, even the Air Force has been planning this for many, many years. So it is not the capabilities that we used in Op Sindoor didn't come overnight. It was 14 or 15 years in the making. So we are very clear the trajectory on which technology is going, and Air Force tries to be as up ahead in terms of technology as possible. But like I said earlier, also, you had Op Sindoor, and I was fortunate enough that I was the vice chief. So with the background of Kargil conflict, I think a lot of the lessons we learned there we have incorporated, especially in our targeting and intelligence, and that's why you saw the kind of strikes that we did. They were so accurate. It is very easy to say, you can take a long range weapon and put on an aircraft and go. But the kind of work that goes on behind, that is what really determines whether the strike will be successful or not. And that happens largely on ground. And for, you have to make target folders and things like that, accuracy of coordinates. So there are a lot of aspects involved, even directions of attack. You have to take into account jamming and things like that. So all these aspects, some of it, of course, I carried with me from my own operational experience in Kargil, and it does come in handy. And it is true for all the senior leadership. I think you get basically what you have been through in your career. I think some of the lessons you take forward and hopefully try to improve, so that as an organization, the Air Force is better off the next time.
Right, absolutely. And the foundation of that was laid during Operation Safed Sagar in 1999. Marshal Tiwari, absolutely fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for narrating your experiences during Operation Safed Sagar in such granular detail. Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandeep.